Well, hello and welcome from GiveWise Foundation Canada, and we're here today with Mike Todd of Transform Philanthropy, and we are going to be discussing donor-advised funds, which I believe donor-advised funds, or DAFs, have become the present and the future of charitable giving. Anyone who utilizes this vehicle for charitable giving has really commented to us that they can't imagine doing their giving any other way going forward. And so, because of that and because of the effectiveness of DAFs, I will say that I have become a bit of a DAF geek. I get far too excited talking about them. And what I'm excited about is talking with Mike Todd here, a fellow DAF geek. I think that's not a I think that's not an exaggeration, and it's not a slight by any means. You've been called by our friend from CAGP, but he's moving on. But Paul Nazareth, you've been called the DAF Whisperer, and I just think Mike has been such a great friend to GiveWise, to Tammy and Tammy Kyte, executive director, and myself at GiveWise. Man, like, you welcomed us in from the first meetings at CAGP, and I think you were just excited that more people are joining the space. And so we've always felt a welcome from you and kinship, and we appreciate all of the support and wisdom that you have offered to us, and all of the collaboration and willingness for us to bounce questions off you. So, Mike, we were just discussing before we started this, about 10 years in the DAF space, which is like 100 dog years, it feels like, because I believe you've probably seen a ton of change in the donor advised fund sector or space in Canada and in North America.
That's true. Yeah, lots of change.
Lots of change, and you've been through various iterations of what the DAF does for people, how it helps donors, how it helps charities. And I think we've got some exciting things that are happening in the space. I know we have exciting things. And Transform Philanthropy was started last year, I believe. And why was Transform Philanthropy birthed by yourself? That's the question I have.
That's a good one, Dan. Thanks, and thanks for the warm welcome and the friendly words. Yeah, in a nutshell, 10 years in the DAF space, I've seen a lot of change. I've worked with different organizations, and I've seen the very slow but steady growth of the DAF. And it just seems more recently, we're kind of on the cusp of really going here. And yet, there's still uncertainty or some confusion. So I started Transform Philanthropy basically because I realized that this is exactly what I want to do. I want to help charities, I want to help wealth advisors, and I also want to help donors or clients. And there was this growth starting, but there was still lots of uncertainty from all three of those camps. So, and nobody was really addressing this issue directly. So I thought, well, I'm going to go out and do this because I'm passionate about donor advised funds. I think charity in Canada has turned into some headwinds, and I think the donor advised fund, quite honestly, is going to go a long way to help solve some of these problems for charity in Canada. So I'm obviously a DAF geek as well and quite passionate about it, but really Transform Philanthropy was started to directly address the benefits of DAFs and how people could incorporate them, and how specifically advisors can incorporate them into their practice.
Oh, fantastic. Great. And we need more of those connecting points and those bridges. And I believe I see you as a real bridge between, so that charities are not looking side-eyed at wealth advisors or alternate forms of funding, so that they're looking full on with eagerness and expectation that, you know what, there are various channels that are different than the traditional channels that charities have experienced their funding through. And wealth advisors play such a key role in the lives of their donors, or sorry, their clients, who, if those clients are donors and are generous, wealth advisors can help those clients tremendously with the strategic aspect of giving. And I believe that charity ultimately will benefit from that relationship and that sacred advisor-client relationship that financial planners and wealth advisors play. So just a reminder, attendance of this webinar gets you a continuing education credit, 1 credit, and this webinar will be available on demand through givewise.ca, our YouTube channel, after we are done. So without further ado, Mike, I'd like you to take us into the world of DAFs and give us your awesome, succinct explanation of the benefits.
All right, thanks, Dan. Here we go. Let's just get this up here. So philanthropy and wealth management, which really means by default, donor advised funds in many, many ways. So we're going to talk about this today. As we get started, let me position this presentation a little bit. And in order to do that, unfortunately, I need to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you why I'm here, and then also why I think it's a great idea that you are here and interested. So let's move along. My personal purpose is to spread the magic of generosity. That's my life's work. That's what I'm committed to. But I started my career in the wealth management business, specifically in mutual funds. And this was some time ago. I did a couple of years with Templeton. I spent a decade with Fidelity Investments. I was in internal sales, external wholesaler. I was an RVP, VP Alliance Distribution. I grew up through the ranks of Fidelity. I loved it. But the important point to stress here is I still love your business. If you're a wealth advisor, I love the business you're in, and I'm excited about it as well. And I tell you this because I understand what you do for a living and how you are compensated for doing it. And I think that's important. I'm not here to ask you to give up your income, to give up assets in order to help charity. I'm not. I'm here because I firmly believe offering philanthropic guidance of some sort to your clients is good for your business. As a wholesaler, I always remember the only reason I had the right to ask for some time from an advisor was by bringing a sales idea, a business building idea. And that's quite honestly, that's the way I view this. I want to start off with that thought. And I likely am going to end with that thought too, that this is good for your business. And in between, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We'll talk about why you should be offering philanthropic guidance to your clients. We're going to talk about donor advised funds, as Dan said, which is often the what of how you're going to do that. We'll talk about how to bring this up with clients, and we'll even spend a minute or two talking about what those clients may look like. Some of these folks are already in your book, and it's just a question of figuring out who would benefit. So let's move on without too much more delay. Dan mentioned the CE credit. That's great. Talk a little bit about why we're talking about this now, and we'll expand on that a little bit as we go through. Well, it really, and I've been around for a number of years, a few decades, and I've seen this new reality unfolding. The wealth management business is becoming holistic, and that's a word we hear a lot. It can mean different things to different people, but I think philanthropy fits into that category perfectly. More and more of your clients, they want their finances to align with their values, and you're probably hearing that. And there's some confusion over how that happens, or just questions. This is important to me. How do we do this? How do we get this alignment? And philanthropy, again, is perfect. For clients who give, their giving is generally a very important element of their wealth. And that's an important word if you are their wealth advisor. Now, I'm not here suggesting that we're going to turn every client into a giver. That's a different battle that we're not going to fight today. But I guarantee you have existing clients who give. And for some of those folks, it's very, very important element of their wealth. And you are their wealth advisor, so it stands to reason that you would want to speak into that. The reality is, there are good ways to give and there are better ways to give. I try to stay positive. I used to say there are bad ways to give and better ways to give. I don't say that very often, but I do believe it's actually possible to give in a bad way as opposed to other options. So and again, that's where you can speak into your client's giving. Charitable giving is at least, now it's a lot more, but it is at least a financial transaction. And that alone, allows you to speak into that transaction. And so advisors can and must provide guidance and advice on giving. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about that. But the reality is, and I'm seeing this unfold even today, philanthropy has become a legitimate element of wealth planning. And so therefore you can't ignore it. You have to make a decision. You can decide not to get involved. I think there are risks to that, but you can't ignore it. It's a legitimate element now of a good wealth plan. Let's go back a few years to COVID, because I think COVID had a lot to do with this rise of the interest in values-based investing, getting your finances in alignment. It's just really interesting period of time, obviously. It was a lot more than that. But I took this from the 2021 EY Global Wealth Research Report, which is a huge document, very, very valuable. And they address this issue that COVID caused a lot of clients to start to focus on their own health and well-being. And by extension, their families, their communities, and people started to look beyond purely financial outcomes. And they wanted to build purpose into their investment portfolios and their relationships. And in response to all this, EY actually said to differentiate their capabilities in this area, wealth managers should aspire to build purposeful, personalized client legacies. And I can't think of a better definition, really, of philanthropy and incorporating philanthropy into your practice. So very, very important. All right, let me give you a couple of definitions. I'm not going to try to turn you into a philanthropy expert, but just so you know some of the players in the game. In Canada, there are 3 different kinds of charitable entities. There are public foundations, there's around 5,000 of those. Private foundations, that would predominantly be family foundations. And there's a little over 6,000 of those. And then charitable organizations, and there's 75,000 of those. And very, very simply, if you want to figure out what these 3 categories are, foundations raise and grant money, and charitable organizations spend it on their programs. So very, very simple. Foundations raise the money, they grant it to charities, and charitable organizations then spend it. Another definition, a donor advised fund, which is why we're here today. I like to say it's a giving vehicle offered and administered by a registered charity, which allows a donor to donate today, receive a tax receipt today, and then provide recommendations on the granting of those assets, those funds, to the charities of their choice over time, whether that's tomorrow, next week, next year, 10 years from now, or for the rest of their lives, or even beyond. Well, how does it work? I got to admit, I'm a visual thinker, so this helps me. Hopefully this will help some of you as well. We make a donation into the donor advised fund, the DAF, which really is held with a registered charity, usually a public foundation. Remember those 3 categories. For that, the donor receives their tax receipt upon that donation. And then the funds sit in the DAF, and they are available to be granted to the charities of the donor's choice over time. And so that it's very, very simple. The thing to keep in mind here, the important point, is this donation into the DAF is an irrevocable donation. You're actually giving money to the foundation that sponsors the DAF. So it's irrevocable. You can't have the money back, and you are giving up control over those assets. But because it's a donor advised fund, you have the right to offer advice to the foundation on where you want that money ultimately sent. And people say, well, advice, that's not an instruction. That sounds kind of risky. But the reality is, foundations that offer donor advised funds are in the business of doing this. And as long as it is a duly registered charity with CRA, they're going to honor the donor's wishes. So that's kind of a brief look at the model. But really, when you talk about the donor advised fund, there's 2 elements of it. Very often there's 2 elements of it. It can be comprised of an investment account held with the donor's advisor, holding the assets that were either donated or that where the funds were ultimately invested once they were donated. And then when it comes time to make one of these grants, then there has to be cash raised, and that sits in some sort of a giving account. So it goes from being invested, converted to cash, and then from a giving account, maybe that's just the charities or the foundation's bank account. In the case of GiveWise, there's some technology involved where the donor has an online account and then can log in and then send the money to the charities that they wish to. So 2 elements, investing and then cash to be granted. And we generally recommend that the assets be maintained in an investment account pretty much until it's time to send the money out. You may want to keep a little bit of cash available for last minute requests, etc. But we want this money to grow over time, and that's important because at this point, this investment account is actually owned by the foundation that runs the DAF, and so that growth occurs tax-free. And so you're a donor, you donate money, and you could ultimately end up giving away, granting more money than you actually donated because it grows while it's sitting in this investment account. I like to draw this line down the middle and really start to stress that it's two separate sections. There's the left and the right. I call these 1 and 2. There's the donation, and then there's the granting, and they're treated separately. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We'll return to this idea in a little bit as well, to that graphic. So a donor advised fund sponsor, that's simply the foundation which receives and receipts the donations and then allows donors to make that suggestion or give that advice on where they want the funds to go. So the foundation that offers DAFs is known as, at least I like to refer to them as, the donor advised fund sponsor. And there are a lot of them. I've got some representation here of the different ones and different kinds of donor advised fund sponsors in Canada. And there's a couple of categories here that you can start to see when you look at the screen. There are DAFs that are affiliated with some of the banks. Aqueduct Foundation here, for instance, is affiliated with Scotia. So most of the banks either have their own affiliated DAF or they partner with somebody. So bank-owned DAFs. There are some here that are affiliated with wealth management firms. Raymond James and Nicola, you see here, they're a couple. And so these firms would offer donor advised funds specifically for their own advisors to offer to their own clients. So wealth management affiliated donor advised funds. There are what I would consider really independent donor advised funds. GiveWise is one, Makeway, which used to be known as Tides, is one, Charitable Impact, Canada Gives, you see them here, Benefaction. And they are independent entities that have a foundation and offer DAFs. They're not affiliated with any banks. They're not affiliated with any wealth management firms, and they're available for anybody to use and to offer to their clients. Then in the middle, I've got Vancouver Foundation, and that's really there just to represent the broad number of community foundations in Canada. And in fact, I picked Vancouver on purpose, not just because I live in Vancouver, but Vancouver Foundation actually launched the very first donor advised fund account in 1952. So they've been around for a long time. And today, the bulk of donor advised fund assets that exist in Canada would be associated with some of the community foundations. But I should say that a lot of the growth now is with the independents and with the wealth management affiliated DAFs and with the bank affiliated DAFs. But the community foundations have been around for a very long time and hold the bulk of donor advised fund assets at this point. So a lot of different donor advised fund sponsors. This is not all of them, as I said, but it's just to give you a sense of how these things are grouped. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the potential. And again, I'm going back to this article from the Globe and Mail from 2021 when things really started to grow. And a good friend of ours, Keith Sjogren, started to talk about this and write about this. And his name will be familiar to some of you in the wealth management business because Keith was with Investor Economics for a long, long time and involved with some of those fantastic wealth management reports and surveys that they produced. And Keith was actually the first one on that side of the business who started to notice this donor advised fund thing and how it was slowly growing. And he took note and started to focus on it. So he said back in 2021 that he figured the donor advised fund segment would be worth about $10 billion by 2026. And it's an interesting number. Remember, this is 2021 when he said that. Well, the reality is he's changed that now to 12 billion. And quite honestly, I think we're probably pretty close to 12 billion already. And that remains to be seen when another survey is done. But the growth has been phenomenal. It's starting from a low base, yes, but the growth has been rather dramatic. And as Keith points out, a lot of this growth is due to the fact that your fellow wealth advisors are starting to take note and starting to use a donor advised fund as the way predominantly to offer philanthropic guidance to their clients. So low base, but starting to grow, and predominantly because you advisors are starting to take note. Very, very interesting. All right, well, that alone, that statement I just made would probably prompt some of you to start thinking about this. But let me get into more of the details as to, well, why do I need to get involved? I've been in this business for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Never offered help with philanthropy. Doesn't seem to be something my clients care about. Why are we talking about this? What's going on? These two images on the screen are representatives of a number of studies that have been done, both in Canada and the US, where they looked at advisors who said, yes, I do offer philanthropic guidance. So those who are farther down the road, asked them questions about that philanthropic guidance, and then spoke to those advisors' clients and asked similar questions. And the results are really, really interesting. And I've got just a few examples here of some of this fantastic research, which was very, very telling. Advisors saying, listen, I bring it up with all my clients. And that advisor's client saying, my advisor has never asked me. It's really interesting. And this is a common theme you're going to see unfold here. Advisor, I'm always the one who brings it up. And the client, we only talk about it when I bring it up. Advisor, my clients don't want help with their giving because they've never brought it up. It's an interesting statement. The client is saying, listen, my advisor clearly doesn't want to help me with my giving because he's never brought it up. And I refer to this as the disconnect. There's a real problem here with the two sides of the desk, the advisor sitting on one side, the client sitting on the other side, and there's a disconnect in communication of wishes when it comes to philanthropy. And keep in mind, this is from advisors who already said, yes, I do this. So it's really interesting. And I'm trying to get you thinking about the clients in your own book and what they might be thinking as they're sitting on the other side of the desk, but not necessarily voicing and asking about. Well, why is it so important for advisors to be involved with their clients' giving? And what is your role? And you're probably starting to ask that question yourself. It's obvious on one level. Part of the critical role of the advisor is to do with taxes. And this is the area where you can really add value. And here's a simple example, leaving aside the issue of AMT for the moment, we don't want to go down that road today. Very simply, the donation of shares in kind is preferential when it comes to taxes to donating cash. Very simple, and I'm sure you all know that. But again, I suspect you've got clients who are writing checks to charities who have a non-registered account with you with shares in it with capital gains that could be used. And that's the preferential way to give. So right off the bat, there's something going on here that where you can add value. Okay, let's go back to my favorite image here. And this is where we start to talk about the donor advice fund as a wealth management tool. It is such a phenomenal tool. It's so flexible, and there's so many ways that can be used that we want to start talking about this. So remember that division I've got there. Those two sides, to my mind, represent the brain and the heart. On the left side, we have the donation into the DAF. And that's where you are involved, where you are adding value. And we're doing this intelligently. We're looking for the assets with the highest capital gain. We are choosing carefully. We're looking at how much, perhaps, to deal with particular tax issues. On the other side, where your client gets the opportunity to make grants to charity, they're doing that because of their heart, because these things are important to them. These organizations, these causes are near and dear to them. They make them happy, they make them sad, they keep them awake at night, they involve the family, whatever the case is. Two sides to the transaction, the intelligence side and the heartfelt side. It's important to keep this distinction in mind. Obviously, you're adding your value on the intelligence side of the transaction. That's obvious, and that's your comfort zone. This is where we feel like we really should be involved. If we're saving our clients taxes, this is a no-brainer. It's obvious. However, here's the challenge for you. You're adding value on the intelligence side of the equation, but the client wants you to help them with the heart side. Their giving is not necessarily to save taxes. Their giving is to deal with the causes and the organizations that are important to them. That's why they give. And they want you to help with their giving, which means you've got to lead with this heart side of the equation. You've got to talk about why it's important to them. Talk about the organizations they are supporting and why are they important to you and your family, etc. Focus on the heart side, because the biggest mistake advisors make, and this is available in all sorts of research as well, is they go on and on about the tax savings. And yeah, that's, as I just said, that's where you're adding your professional value. Absolutely. Is it important? Absolutely. But the client wants you to know that you're helping them do a better job of supporting the causes they're connected to. And that's more important. So keep that in mind. Yeah, absolutely. Point out the value of the tax benefit and let them know that you're taking care of that. You're looking at that, but then spend the majority of your time talking to your clients about why these organizations are important to them and why this cause has impacted their family. Please keep that in mind. Okay, that's a very simple introduction to why I think it makes sense for you to incorporate philanthropy into your practice. Hopefully now you're thinking a little bit about some of your clients. Maybe you've had some brief conversations in the past about their charitable giving, maybe not. But I thought it would be valuable to take a look at existing DAF clients that are out there and what do they look like? Because this is going to give you clues as to who in your book you should be looking at. Well, there's a whole bunch of things here, and I'll just go through them very, very quickly. Sold their business? Yeah. Facing taxes? Absolutely. There's an opportunity to talk about their philanthropic giving. They've got a lot of capital gains, and instead of selling those stocks and making grants to charities with cash, there's an opportunity there as well. And you would be surprised at the number of people I talk to with highly appreciated stocks and funds who sell those, incur taxes, and then write a check to charity. It's such a great entry point for you to add value immediately. Those who don't have children, and I don't have children, and it's actually surprising to me the number of people in Canada who fit into this category. So they don't have any kids, and now they're trying to figure out who they're going to support and how much to give. Am I giving now? Is this going to be testamentary? All sorts of questions. So folks who don't have children, important to keep in mind. Those who've had an increase in wealth, maybe it was an inheritance, realize that they've got more than they need, and they want to be able to fund their DAF account. And that's an interesting transaction, funding your DAF account so that they've got plenty to give away now and also in the future. Right, as I said, either tomorrow, next day, next year, 10 years from now, doesn't matter. Pandemic, we talked enough about COVID today, but the pandemic really got a lot of people thinking about those who were less fortunate. Those who are deciding to retire within the next several years, this is an interesting category. People who have given throughout their lives, and they're growing concerned that they may not be able to maintain that level of giving in their retirement. Well, here's an opportunity to fund their donor advised fund now while they're in their higher income years so that they have this pool available to grant throughout their retirement. That's an interesting category. Those who are recently divorced or widowed, especially women, and who are in control of the money and are typically, gentlemen, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, they're typically more philanthropic than men. Those who have had a foundation, a private foundation generally, and they've been frustrated by it. It's complex, there's some administration, there's some cost, and they want something simpler and less expensive. Well, that would be a donor advised fund. There are those who have a foundation, and rightly so, they do need a foundation because of what they're doing, but there's an opportunity to have a donor advised fund to complement their foundation. I like to talk about off-mission giving. And I tell the story of some folks I know who are very well known in their city for supporting the arts. That's what they're known for, and they like that. They like the acknowledgement. But they have an issue that's hit their family that they want to support, but they don't necessarily want people to know about this. Well, they open up a sidecar donor advised fund, as I like to call it. And they do that granting through their donor advised fund where they can do it anonymously, which they can't do in their foundation. And that's to the next point as well. A private foundation in Canada is not private. That information is all available online to everybody. So if you wish to donate anonymously, you can do that through a donor advised fund. there's not a high number of people who are worried about anonymity, but for those who are concerned about privacy, they're very concerned. And so to have an option is important. Those who want to involve their families, their children, instill their charitable values in them, it's a great tool for that. And those who are registered account millionaires, I love that term. And as I said earlier, I was a wholesaler at Fidelity a long time ago, and I remember those days. The pitch for our RSPs was, put your money away, get the tax savings, and then take it into income when you're going to be retired and in a lower tax bracket. And it's a great concept, but I've seen time and time again, people whose RSPs have done extremely well and don't find themselves in a lower tax bracket, and now they're faced with forced withdrawals out of their RSP. And it's kind of surprising to think about it in this way, but your registered accounts can actually become a tax liability. Well, charitable giving can help with that. So very, very important. So that's just a quick peek at some of the scenarios that may catch your attention and draw to your attention the fact that these clients may be ones who I can have this conversation with. Now, the good news is, how do I do this? Well, the good news is it's simply a collection of questions. I talk about the philanthropic conversation. It could sound a little intimidating. It's just simply a collection of questions that can be asked of clients. And my number one favorite place to start is very, very simply, are there charitable organizations you support or causes that are important to you and your family? That's it. It's very simple. My challenge is, I ask you to insert this question into your next 6 client reviews. That's just the number I'm making up. One's not enough. Insert it into the next 6 client reviews. Are there charitable organizations you support or causes that are important to you and your family? Just ask the question and see what happens. Ask the question and stop talking. That's the important part, the awkward silence. Let it happen and see what happens. If your clients are saying to you, listen, I've been with you for a long time, we've never talked about this before, here's a couple things you can tell them. Listen, your giving is important to you and it comes from your wealth. And as your wealth advisor, I have a role to play there. And I want to make sure you're giving in the most efficient and effective manner. Remember what I said though about the brain and the heart. I know taxes are not the reason you give, but they do directly impact your ability to give, how much you can give. So let me do my part so that you can have the best experience and have the most impact with the causes that are so important to you. See how we're focusing on the heart there. You're telling them why you're doing the intelligent part, but we're focusing on the heart. And this is just a great explanation as to why you're starting to incorporate philanthropy in your practice. Now, keep in mind, you have this conversation with them. I guarantee you, I guarantee you, it's not a word that we can use in the wealth management business very often, but I guarantee you, if you ask this question of your clients, doesn't matter how long they've been with you, you will find out something new about them. Guaranteed. I have this conversation all the time with advisors who say, this client's been with me for 20 years. I just found out something about his family that I never knew. And I've actually sat in on a number of these conversations. And it's exciting to watch what happens. And it's always interesting to see the look on the advisor's face when they think they know everything about this client, and then they learn something new that was just completely not on their radar screen at all. So when you have this conversation, and there are other questions as well, this may not mean that you rush into opening a donor advised fund for them. It may not be the right solution. But what it does mean is that this is now a subject that's a regular part of your interaction with this client, and that's philanthropy. Bring it up every time. It does mean that your relationship with the client has deepened dramatically. And I mean that dramatically. That's my guarantee to you. It's really, really interesting to watch this happen. Why should I get involved? Well, as I said earlier, philanthropy is a business building idea. And here's my challenge again to you. There's plenty of reports out there to talk about high net worth individuals and how many of them consider themselves charitable. I've seen numbers as low as 60%. I've seen numbers as high as 90%. Let's just split the difference and say that 75% of high net worth individuals consider themselves charitable. I have yet to meet an advisor who says they're not interested in meeting high net worth individuals. So 75% of them give, and most advisors would love to have them as clients. However, in my experience, this is an anecdotal number, I'm making this up, but I think it's pretty accurate. Less than 5% of advisors include philanthropy in their service offering currently. That's a very low number, less than 5%. And I'm trying to draw your attention to the paradox of high net worth folks who you'd love to have as clients, most of which give charitably and not incorporating philanthropy into your wealth management practice. That's an odd spread. So I talk about the spread. I'm going to challenge you with the spread. This is the biggest opportunity, I believe, that you're going to find in a long, long time to differentiate yourself from the crowd and to appeal to exactly the kind of clients you're looking for. It's not rocket science. You want high net worth individuals to come to your practice? Well, they're charitable givers. On balance, they're charitable givers. So you've got to help them with that. You focus on the reasons why they give. You speak to the fact that your expertise is going to help them on the intelligence, the brain side of the equation, but you focus on the heart. And I'm telling you, your business will change dramatically. It makes you very, very referable, because high net worth individuals who give, they tend, these folks tend to associate together. Whether it's sitting around having a drink at the golf club after a game, they're talking about their giving, because people who give generously, they like to talk about it, and they like to talk about ideas and who they're giving to and why. And if your client is the one at the table who can say, yeah, my advisor is helping me with my giving and things have changed pretty dramatically, and the rest of them are looking at him like, your advisor is what? Helping you with your giving? I've never heard of that. This will make you referable, I guarantee it. What I want to do, I'm going to end it there, but I'm happy to send you an article that I've written that lists off the remaining client review questions that I've come up with. You recall that favorite one: are there causes or charities that are important to you and your family? Well, there are other questions to keep that conversation going. So if you send me an email and say, I'd love that article, I'll send it off to you, and be very, very happy to do that. I want to thank GiveWise again, and at this point, turn it over to Dan and see if we've got questions we can deal with, and do some housekeeping as well.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, appreciate it's just such a great nutshell presentation on the idea of introducing philanthropy into that client advisor relationship. And I think what's really cool about donor advised funds is you kind of just done the tip of the iceberg, because we've realized there are so many different ways that DAFs can benefit taxpayers in Canada, givers in Canada, wealth advisors with their practice, and the flexibility of donor advised funds lends itself to all of the important aspects of that you've covered of why an advisor would want to enter that conversation with their client. So thanks again. And we had a question we just had a question during your presentation. Have you ever seen a donor advised fund refuse a donor's request to grant out to a charity? And
sure, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that speaks to that arrangement that I talked about before, where it isn't an irrevocable donation, so you can't have the money back, but the foundations that are involved in sponsoring donor advised funds are generally willing to grant to any charity as long as it's duly registered. I would say I think I've heard of two situations, and both of them were kind of unusual. Both of them, the original donor had passed away, and the family had stepped in and requested some donations, and I think there was some issues there with the foundation sponsoring the DAF, but highly unusual. And I don't know the exact specifics, but there were some mitigating circumstances there that caused issues. So on balance, I would say, and Dan, you can probably speak to this as well, running a DAF, but like I said, this is the business, if I can use the word business, this is the business these foundations are in. They're intentionally providing donor advised funds to Canadian clients. And as long as it is a duly registered charity and there are no issues,
Yeah.
no financial problems that CRA is revoking their status, etc. As long as it's there, the foundation is going to honor the wishes of the charity, of the donor. In Canada, we don't have much of what in the US they have, which would be cause-specific donor advised funds. So there are donor advised funds, for instance, that deal with the environment. And so they want the donors to those DAFs giving to environmental causes. That's different. You know that going into that. But in Canada, it's very broad-based. We don't have the specifics like that. And I'm not aware of any problems in the normal course of granting where donors have been refused.
Yeah, you nailed it. And from our standpoint, GiveWise being what we call cause agnostic as a donor advised fund, we are in the business of providing the donors an opportunity to direct their charitable funds out to the charities they care about. So of the 86,000 or so registered charities in Canada, if they are in good standing with the CRA Charities Directorate, they will show up in our database, which is tied right into CRA. And so a responsibly run donor advised fund, it behooves the donor and the wealth advisor to ask some questions of the donor advised fund sponsor. Is this a DAF that's ideologically based? Because then they may not, they may limit that list of charities that are available to grant to. And so as a donor, you don't want any surprises. You go through and set up a DAF, let's say, whether it's ideological, whether it's religion, or whether it's environmental based. But also regionally based donor advised funds exist, as in donor advised funds, particularly inside of community foundations. Well, if you are opening a donor advised fund with the Winnipeg Community Foundation and you want to grant out outside of Winnipeg, they might look at it and say, well, we exist as a community foundation to benefit the greater Winnipeg area. And so you just want to do a little bit of homework as to, okay, what regionally is available, what's on the menu, what's on the menu for the charities available. And so as far as refusing to grant, it hasn't been out of some level of irresponsibility that I've ever seen a donor advised fund or GiveWise refuse to grant to a charity. Something that we will caution donors as well is, and this can get into the weeds a little bit, it's specific, but it's still important. A donor cannot experience any personal material gain from a donation that they make. So a donor needs to think that through in mind in terms of recommending a grant. So those are things where it has to truly be a charitable act that does not materially benefit the donor on the way on and come back to them as some sort of benefit, because they've made that irrevocable charitable gift in good conscience that this is for the benefit of community and not myself. So those are just some, that's getting into some technical details about the legalities of donating in Canada. Thankful that we live in a nation that does have such a generous tax incented environment, and our tax act does allow for all kinds of flexibility in terms of how donations are credited in terms of tax savings. So and you covered some of those just in such a great overview. Where I would encourage wealth advisors is email Mike. Mike at transformphilanthropy.ca. If you have questions, email myself, dan.kyte@givewise.ca. So both of us are .ca domains in terms of our websites. And we're happy to discuss specific scenarios We both love that, and so if you want of course, you talk to me, I'm going to talk about how great GiveWise is in terms of as a donor advised fund. If you want to talk with someone who knows and just wants to see DAFs in general grow, which I do too. But Mike will have maybe a little more of a broad understanding of which donor advised fund sponsors are stronger at which aspects of delivering services to wealth advisors and clients. So with that said, I just want to encourage that I think that a generous society is a healthier society. And so our two-word tagline at GiveWise is to grow generosity. That's why we exist. So no matter which giving vehicle you use, that conversation that you can have as a wealth advisor with clients will benefit everyone involved, and it raises the tide for all, I believe. And so thanks again, Mike. And I think we've got all kinds of exciting ways that we're going to see donor advised funds and strategic charitable giving grow in Canada. And I think we're just on the front side of a wave that is coming. Any further comments on that?
No, I completely agree with you. I think the wave is just starting. We're Canadian, so we talk about the hockey stick curve. We're just starting up.
Yeah.
DAFs growing phenomenally from a very low base, growing because there are advisors who are getting on board. And so I just issue that challenge again. Incorporate the question into your client reviews, see what happens, and understand that this is going to help build your business. It's going to help deepen relationships.
Awesome. So as a financial advisor, if you are wanting to get the certificate for your CE credit, email myself, dan.kyte, Kyte, at givewise.ca. I'll put my email address in the comments section of the video, and that way you can get your certificate. And we thank you again for taking the time with us. And go out there and just spread generosity. Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.